nature recovery mapping in Herefordshire webinar. We'll be running through about 20 minutes worth of presentation today, and we'll be having a short mapping demonstration as well. I'm Rosie Wilmot. I'm an officer in the Sustainability and Climate Change team. I'm just facilitating the session. We'll be hearing from the officers directly involved in the local nature recovery strategy shortly. As I said, we'll be circulating all the slides and the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation or the mapping demo, if you could just pop them into the chat for us, we'll address all of those at the end. We've left a nice long time at the end to hopefully get through all of that. If your question isn't answered today, though, be reassured we'll address any unanswered questions in writing or directly and circulate everything along with the slides and presentation. Great. I'll hand over now to Liz Dubley, who's the lead officer on the local nature recovery strategy. Thanks very much, Liz. Over to you.
Afternoon, everyone, and just wanted to start by saying thank you for joining us today. We've got a really good attendance, so it's brilliant that you're keen to hear more about the work that we're doing. So I'm the lead officer at the council for delivery of the local nature recovery strategy and also nutrient work, which does have a kind of interrelationship. And just to give you a little bit of background on the LNRS work that we're doing, we were appointed by DEFRA as the responsible authority to lead on the delivery of the nature recovery strategy. But I just wanted to highlight it's very much a partnership piece. So we are led by a steering group that has representation from all sectors. So that's the farming community, environment, regulatory, and wider. And we are a very small group, and in fact, you'll see all members are here today. So I will just briefly introduce Emma Gardner from Biological Records Centre and Charlie Alfandri, who sits within Herefordshire Council, who's leading on the work on bringing forward the strategy. And we have had some very tight timescales to deliver the strategy from DEFRA, which have now been relaxed slightly. So originally it was anticipated for that the plan needed to be completed by spring 25, and that deadline's now been extended to the close of 25, which has given us a little bit more breathing space and enabled us to do a bit more engagement with all sectors. So we have previously done some engagement with the farming and landowning community, and we're anticipating doing broader with commerce and industry, public health and so on. So we're really pleased to be able to talk to you at parish and town councils today, and this is the first, hopefully, of further steps within that engagement process. So I'm going to hand over now to Charlie without any further ado, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the detail of how we have worked up the strategy and where we've got to date. Thanks, Charlie.
Hello, thanks for that, Liz. Okay, so welcome everyone. So this is our presentation about the LNRS opportunities mapping. So just to quickly build on from what Liz says, so Liz said about the LNRS, so a little bit of background about it. So it was created through the Environment Act of 2021, based on the principles brought forward by Sir John Lawton in his Making Spaces for Nature report of 2010. Essentially, the key principles to take away from the report were that any natural areas within England specifically need to be more, bigger, better, and more joined up. And this is kind of the fundamentals of the LNRS program, is that we are looking to provide advice and a strategy moving forward of how to achieve that for us specifically within Herefordshire, as a way to achieve the government's target of 30% of nature to be returned, 30% of land and coastlines to be returned to nature by 2030. This isn't just while this is the first LNRS, there will be more coming to the future, with aims of it repeating every about 3 to 8 years. So the process for LNRS, just to give you a bit of an oversight on that, is that it starts with a mapping of any areas of current importance, biologically speaking. So looking at having a map of our current nature reserves, triple SIs, and any irreplaceable habitats such as, ancient woodland that we have within the county. The second step is more looking at when you've got subsequent LNRSs of looking at the review of what's taken place and what's currently in place. The third step, we're looking at providing a description of the strategy area as a whole. So having that more description of any strategies of the Malvern Hills as an example, and also any areas of biodiversity and immediate opportunity areas that there may be. And building from that, we have our potential priorities.
Apologies, Charlie. I think I've accidentally cut you off there.
That's absolutely fine. Got it. Sorry, so yes, the priority measures. So we've gone out to expert groups to find out what they believe the best ways for us to achieve nature recovery within Herefordshire are. We've then created a long list and are currently in the process of creating a short list that will then feed into the opportunities map, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a sec, as a way for, with the potential opportunities that are mapped, you can then click on the map and then be able to see these are the measures that should take place for in this specific area. And then the opportunities map itself is basically an area that takes the base areas that we currently have and have mapped on areas that we'd like to see nature recovery to take place within. All of that is then brought together to form the LNRS as a whole. Bear with me a second. There we go. So, in terms of the mapping and opportunities mapping, a little bit of background on what's currently taking place. So, we went out to Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, who created the map for us. So they have also done the mapping for Gloucestershire, Worcestershire, and ourselves. So it provides a nice continuity with our neighbouring counties of with the mapping and how it's formatted. So the baseline map does contain core habitats, but it also contains traditional orchards as a recognition of the cultural importance for Herefordshire, and as an important environmental habitat within the county. From looking through the data, there are three main habitat types that are particularly important within Herefordshire. These are woodlands, open habitat, and wetlands. So in terms of woodlands, that does cover all forms of woodlands, whether it be deciduous, riparian, and ancient. Open habitat is any form of open space, so looking at acid grassland, lowland meadows, things like that. And wetland covers open wetland and wet woodlands as well. The data that was used to create all of this has come from both local and national databases. So an example of both of those would be a phase 1 habitat survey for a specific site within Herefordshire, or on a national basis, we'd be using the Ancient Woodlands Inventory. And then to actually produce the opportunities map, we've used cost distance analysis to do so, which is something I will cover in a little bit. So the baseline map, this is our baseline map, as you can see. So it basically, so as I said earlier, it shows all of our areas of core habitats and irreplaceable habitats that we have throughout the county. It's a really useful resource as it allows us to be able to initially see what we've got and get an initial view of where we think we could potentially build up some corridors. We are starting in a relatively strong position, as we can see areas like the Black Mountains and Malvern Hills and the Willop Dome. We've got some strong areas that we can use to build out of our with nature recovery through corridors and stepping stones to be able to really promote that recovery throughout the county. In order to create those layers, what we've had to do is we've had to use a couple of different scoring techniques. So the first one is basically how permeable is the land going to be for nature, whether that be plants or animals, to be able to move through. So the higher the score, the harder it is for those natural processes to reach through. So the lower end, you've got more of the natural acidic grassland areas that is just that if you the animals could in theory just walk straight through with no impediment at all. As you come down, you're approaching more man-made structures, or potentially more denser vegetation such as woodland. Or so best examples are when you're moving into the medium are conservation roadside verges, allotments, and then as you move further down, you've got those more dense, such as coniferous woodland. And the low permeability, you have those more artificial areas or man-made, so looking more amenity grasslands, bare ground, and then right at the bottom, roads and buildings. Those scores are then combined with weighting for opportunities and constraints. So we're looking at areas from those from those core habitats of where we believe that nature recovery could go. So this table as an example is just for open habitats. For wetland and woodland that have their own tables that are slightly different, and I will cover how they differ when we get to those stages. So the first one of looking at cost, the cost of the distance. So those areas within that are nearer to those core habitats are given a much higher weighting, whereas the further away you go, it starts dropping off. As there is a lot of agricultural land within Herefordshire, the decision was made that higher grade agricultural land would be given a lower weighting as a recognition of that there is a higher priority of the use of that land as opposed to nature recovery. It's not to say that we don't want nature recovery to take place there, as it is still given a value, even the higher grades are still given a value. But as I said, in recognition of the fact of the use that it has been given a lower grade. The other areas to bear in mind are heritage sites. This has been given for open habitat quite a high score, whereas in woodland it has actually been given a score of 0 in recognizing the fact that open habitat and grassland isn't really going to cause that much damage to a heritage site. Whereas if you were to start growing a woodland there, the potential of the trees growing and the roots have the potential to cause a lot more damage. Equally, any currently existing core habitat has been given a score of 0, as we don't want those existing habitat to be damaged by the potential of us trying to change it to a different form of habitat. So this is the map itself on a county-wide level. If I quickly skip through, so on a more individual level, so just north of Herefordshire, this is what the map looks like on a much more usable layer. So we have our existing core habitats indicated in yellow, wetlands, traditional orchards, open habitats of differing priorities, woodlands, and then open or woodland habitats. So anywhere that's been designated open or woodland is basically an area where, from those scorings that I just showed you, has been the scores came out to be even. So whatever work was taking place, whether it be for open habitat or woodland, is basically of the same value that could take place. So it's more down to the landowner's preference as opposed to a specific recommendation. As you can see on the map, there are large spaces of white area. These are important that they are still within the map. We are within the statutory guidance that we've received from DEFRA. We do need to have white spaces, and unfortunately, as much as we'd like to see nature recovery happen everywhere, these are areas that do need to be within there. This is also as one of the incentives for nature recovery is that there will be an uplift of 15% to biodiversity net gain. And these are areas that can only be applied to the higher medium priorities. So anywhere that is either white space or low priority, unfortunately, wouldn't have that incentive applied. However, we do also have some measures that would be applied county-wide as recognition that even though on our maps the white spaces may look like we don't want anything to happen there, we do want nature recovery to take place in these places. It's just there are other places that are of a higher priority.
Charlie, you've gone on to mute.
There we go. Sorry, apologies. So looking forward, what are our next steps regarding this mapping now that we have our first draft? So the first thing we want to do is we want to get feedback on our mapping. Our map is primarily gathered through, as I said earlier, just data sources from either locally, nationally, but we want to get that more local knowledge embedded within the map. And the primary way we want to do this is through an online survey that I will show you in a little bit. Once that data has all been gathered together, we'll then be able to analyze it, see what amendments amendments need to be made to the map, And then we'll go back to our partners at the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, who will be able to assist us with making that. That should then be our final map, and we'll be able to take our priorities and measures, pop them onto those areas of opportunities, so that on the final product, what you will have is a map that you can click on, and it will give you a list of the measures that we would like to see taking place in this area. Equally, it's quite important that we link this map with our neighbouring counties, just to make sure that we have a nice flowing progress. For example, if Worcestershire were showing a large area of woodland, high opportunity of woodland right up to the border, then suddenly we were showing a lot of wetland on the edge. There might be a slight conflict there and how feasible it would really be. So just to make sure that certainly around the borders, there is a nice continuous flow of those nature recovery opportunities is key. So, what are ways that you can assist? So, predominantly, the best way for you to be able to assist is to boost our awareness and to feedback on the mapping through our online survey. The more data that we get, the better this map will be. It will also benefit yourselves as part of the biodiversity duty. The LNRS can provide a great structure for ways of being able to enact that. And the better we can make our strategy, the better it will be, and the easier it will be for you to be able to use it as a tool to help with your biodiversity duty. Equally, we're not just looking for feedback from parish councils, parish councillors. We're looking for feedback from landowners, rural communities, and farmers. So if you're able to promote LNRS as a whole and the mapping and survey throughout those communities, that would be of great benefit to us, so that we can get as many voices heard regarding this as possible. As I said, the survey is the primary way that we want to receive a lot of that feedback. We do have an email address that you can contact us at, but when it comes specifically for the mapping, the survey is predominantly where we would like to see that come through. The feedback that we like, however, from regarding the survey can be about anything. It doesn't have to be just about one thing. For example, we're very aware that we would like some data updates. We've heard a couple of times that some of our data may have a little bit of holes in that. And as you are people who are on the ground, living within those communities, you're in a great position to be able to provide us with that, with those corrections. Equally, it doesn't have to be about data. Any sort of wording you think could be improved, any form of structure, aesthetics, anything like that to make the map as usable as possible, we would greatly take any advice or criticisms or anything like that on board. Equally, aside from the mapping, if you have any environmental projects or future plans upcoming, letting us know about that is also a really key element, because we can then look at getting that embedded within different elements of the LNRS as a whole, to make sure it's all within that sort of framework. So I will hold off on questions for the time being. So I'm just going to go through a quick demonstration of the map, where to find it, and where and sort of how the survey looks and how it all functions. So if I just quickly over here, so the map is found on the Herefordshire Council's LNRS page. So if you just type in Herefordshire LNRS into Google, you should come to this page, and then it is found on the second page here. There's a bit of text that sums up basically everything that I've mentioned today. Then you have a link to the survey, and then you have the map itself down here. So you can turn off all of the separate layers. You don't need them all on at once. For example, so I shall just quickly turn all of them on as just as a quick example. If we were to then, if you wanted to find your parish, so I will use the example of Muchmarkle. Simply type it in here. You get, it will then, unfortunately, it doesn't take you to the spot, but it does drop a nice pin as an example of where to go. You can then, you can zoom in quite a way on the map, and it will provide you with all of the layers and all the different areas. For example, showing quite a nice amount of open habitat and woodland recovery, along with the areas of existing habitat within the area. Once you've done this, I think if you can then follow the link or the QR code that would take you to the survey. So the survey does provide you with options of what for us to know why it is that you've filled out the survey. And then you do have the map as well. Unfortunately, this map does not have the legend, but it functions exactly the same way as the initial map. If you could just drop a pin on where it is that you wish to speak about, or leave a comment about, and then a little bit of detail as to why you've left the pin there and what comment it is that you wish to make. Equally, if you are wishing to make any amendments to the data or layers that we have on our mapping, because all of the mapping has been produced with existing data, we do need something to confirm what it is that you're saying, whether this be some photo evidence or some map or some other form of maps, just as so that we've got evidence of why we've changed the map based on that data. Equally, sorry, excuse me. If you are providing us with that sort of data, you don't need to, but it would if you could provide us with your contact information, just in case that data isn't. If we need say a little bit more data from you, or if you have some questions about it, just so we can get back in touch to make sure that data is embedded. If you're not doing that, you don't need to. It is a completely anonymous survey. All comments and stuff, unless you provide them to us here, are completely anonymous, and you do not need to worry about yeah. But yeah, so thank you very much. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Charlie and Liz. Just to remind you all that if you've got questions, if you could please pop them in the chat. I know that there have been some already asked in the chat that have been addressed. But are there any, Tina, that are in the chat waiting to be answered, or questions that were submitted prior to the webinar?
Yeah, so I'm going to kick off with the first one, which is what practical impact will the different area classifications have? What actions with landowners, for example, will be taken once the map is finalised? And this question was submitted in advance.
Sorry, could you say that again for me, please?
Of course, yeah. So what practical impact will the different area classifications have? So, for example, what actions with landowners would be taken once the map is finalised?
I see. So it depends on the measures that are put into place. So a lot of the time, if you're looking at areas of like high woodland priority, we'd be looking at implementing stuff such as tree planting and making sure that any species that are there are preserved to the best of the ability. The LNRS fundamentally is a voluntary action. There is no what's the word? No legislative that is enforcing anything that is within here outside of but there is the incentive of the 15% to biodiversity net gain.
So yes, if I can just come in then.
Yeah,
so there's another question on here in the chat, just around the kind of how that links into planning, and the two primary mechanisms for funding of the delivery of LNRS are through biodiversity net gain in planning and through environmental land management schemes. So habitat banks delivered within the identified areas as high priority will be subject to an uplift. So they kind of get the kind of 15% the higher benefit because they are identified as areas for prioritising nature recovery. So BNG and LNRS are intrinsically linked. The mapping that we undertake now will feed into the work on the local plan, and we link in with the driving the policies as well, drafting the policies and implementing the policies through the planning process.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you for the question as well, and for that early submission. Tina, is there any others that you want to draw out for us?
Yeah, there's plenty of questions coming in. Thank you. So one question here: can local groups make a local copy of the map for their own work?
Yeah, yes, I would say so. I would add that this is only an initial draft of the LNRS plan. So based on the feedback, it is likely to change due to the nature of we don't know what feedback we're going to get. We can't say how much it will change. But it is currently a public resource, so it can be used. But as I said, it is likely to change. So yeah.
And I think it's worth saying that we are seeking to engage with parish and town councils because I note there's reference to the neighbourhood development plans in the chat as well. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to kind of work through each NDP, but we are aware that there's a lot of local information in there that would potentially be valuable to the LNRS. So I think that's why we are seeking to engage today with parish councils so that you can share that information with us. So if you want to do kind of work through the mapping at a scale that is local to your parish and provide information back to us, even as a hard copy, that you think is relevant to kind of the part of the development of this mapping, then that's really valuable for us.
Thanks, Liz. And following up on that, got a question from Diane about should the areas be shown in any new neighbourhood plans? So sort of the other way around as well, if they're developing their plans.
Yes, absolutely. I think that would be, and I think it gives more weight to policy as well through planning because it feeds into each level. So obviously it is within that national guidance and comes from the Environment Act, but it will be integrated into our local policy and then it will come through down at NDP level. So it's good to have that sort of clear, consistent message to developers as to where they can and can't develop and where investment needs to be placed on nature recovery.
Thanks, Liz. There's a specific question about the weight that will be given in the planning process. Is that something specifically?
And that is more of a planning question. However, there will be policy that links in directly to nature recovery.
Thanks. On some sort of practical level here, talking, Julian's looking at their version of the map. It won't show the colouring for traditional orchards. Is that just a technical problem that could direct you later, Charlie?
Yes, that sounds like. Is that Yeah, I think that sounds like a technical issue, but I will have a look into that just to make sure the colouring for traditional orchards is working.
Thank you. There's also a question about the orange polygons on the map. What do they signify, please?
So the orange ones are the traditional orchards. So the yellow is the core, and then orange is traditional orchards.
Thanks, Charlie. Got another question here from Charles. Are you mapping pheasant shooting woods and areas?
I'm not aware that we are currently. Our approach is very much in line with our neighbouring authorities as well, Gloucestershire and Worcestershire, so that the mapping is all aligned. However, if and obviously the focus is very much around biodiversity, but if there is value in considering that, then please feed that back to us in the comments.
चिकन बना रहा हूँ.
Thanks, Liz. So I think somebody's
Krishna
could possibly mute themselves. Thank you. So just another question. Sorry, can we just come back for a bit of clarification on the colour coding, Charlie, about the lighter yellow areas versus the darker yellow? Talk about darker yellow being existing core habitat and the lighter yellow.
Yes. So the lighter yellow, yes. So having looked at the legend is a little bit wrong. I'm not entirely sure. I will look again and mended. The yellow is the core habitats so this is the bit that is existing areas. So this could be open habitat or woodland. The orange is specifically existing traditional orchards.
Thank you. Just having a quick look through, see what other questions we've got here. We've got some sort of more specific questions, Charlie. I could put to you now, if you think that's suitable. For example, question from Diane: you've identified some area of a stream in Yarpole, and why only some areas of a stream? Is that something that maybe you could follow up with more detailed, specifically?
Yes, I think ones like that would be on a more case-by-case basis.
Right, and there's actually a specific question about contact details. Is there a contact we can use to make follow-up queries not specific to the map details?
Yes, so if you could contact naturerecovery@herefordshire.gov.uk, that would be the best address to go to.
Got a question from Nigel here. Are all sites with environmental designations in Appendix 8 of the 2011 to 2031 local plan included? Is there any cross-referencing to ensure this?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that because I was just replying to one in the chat. Can you just repeat that one for me?
Question about are all sites with environmental designations in Appendix 8 of the 2011 to 2031 local plan included? Is there any cross-referencing with that plan to ensure that's happening?
Yes, so the data is supplied by the Biological Records Centre, and that's supplied both for this mapping and for the local plan. So the information is consistent. However, it's just important to point out that the baseline mapping is set, that criteria as to what's included is set by DEFRA. So there may not be everything that you might have anticipated that was incorporated in the local plan included in LNRS. And a good example of that would be traditional orchards, for example. So that wasn't included in the national requirement from DEFRA as part of the baseline mapping, but because we recognise its importance in Herefordshire, we've then included that in the opportunities mapping. Emma, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on in respect to that answer.
No, but I've just noticed another question come up in the chat actually that's relevant to that. So someone's questioned why Bartonshire Meadows aren't included on the map because they're a wildlife trust reserve, but Liz has just answered that point. So we had to follow very specific criteria given nationally, which didn't include wildlife trust nature reserves. But obviously when any work comes to be done on the ground, we will be taking those things into account, even if we couldn't include them in the mapping that we had to do.
Yes, and it might just be worth adding that actually the Wildlife Trust are one of the members of the steering group, so they are feeding into this process. They are fully integrated.
Thanks all. There's a couple of questions about maybe some more local mapping in the sense that there's a question about is it possible to get a hard copy of the map? And another question here from Michael asking if local councils could have a map to download. I'm assuming that means sort of specifically for their area. It took some time to log on.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and we have said that we will accept sort of hard copies returned to us with local information on. Obviously, the map is available to view. It's something that we can just take away and see if we have got the resource to provide those printouts at a local level, because obviously we would need to distribute them to all parish councils. But if in the meantime, if parishes do want to print off their own version at the scale that's most appropriate to them, annotate it and send it back to us, we're more than happy to receive the information in that format.
Thank you, Liz. I've just got a question here. Is there a target date for any amendments to be submitted, please?
I don't think we've set a date, have we, Charlie? Because I think we've extended the engagement and we're just really keen to kind of ensure that we get as much valuable information back as we can. Charlie, please come in if there's anything that you want to add on that.
No, we don't have a specific date. I think if it could get it to us by within probably the first couple of weeks of or towards the end of February / the first few weeks of March would be ideal. But as But we are looking to, as we're looking to amend the map as we receive feedback. The sooner we receive that feedback, the sooner we can make that amendment. So there's no firm date, but sooner rather than later would be the preference.
It's an ongoing process, isn't it? So as we
Yeah.
receive the feedback, then we're kind of putting that into our mapping for it to be updated.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few follow-on questions that I think we can feed back to you afterwards about some practicalities of the mapping, such as adding a layer about parish boundaries, etc., like little notifications for people who are colourblind, etc. So it's sort of clear the designation. We can pick that up after this. Somebody's got a query just about the prioritisation, that one area of native woodland in their parish is defined as low priority. Could you just talk a little bit about that, why that might be?
If they've got an area of woodland that is currently marked as low priority, that might be because it might not be a part of the initial core habitat site. In which case, if they could provide us with some data to sort of show that woodland, where that woodland is and that it does exist, we can then look at getting that amended so it's within the core habitat. So essentially, the areas that are of low priority are areas we are looking to expand nature recovery into. So there shouldn't be anything there. As I said, we are aware there is a few holes in our data, so that sounds like that is one of them.
And my understanding as well is this is to do with kind of the connectivity between these woodland areas as well. So I don't think we're saying that it's low priority in terms of it's not valuable. It's just as just instead, is there potential to create connectivity of habitat? So yeah, please feedback any comments on your local knowledge.
I've got a suggestion here about, is there any possibility to establish which parish and town councils are actively involved for people to collaborate and I guess discuss how they're going about their responses?
So I think at the moment we're all on a fairly level playing field. So this is one of the first engagement sessions that we have run with parish councils, and this is kind of the overview of the work that we've done to date, because it's important that we've needed to get it to the point where we have some opportunities mapping to share, to seek feedback. What we didn't want was just a blank canvas. We wanted to have a working model that we could seek engagement on. We have discussed the possibility of progressing our engagement now that we've got a little bit more capacity to do that in terms of deadlines not being so tight. So we may, if this is something that's of interest to parish councils, it might be that we can work with collectives in certain areas. So for example, we might take the Ross Town Council and work with parish councils in that area. That's just an example. We could do similar across the country if that's helpful for us to come out and engage in that way. But obviously this is the first iteration of just seeking that feedback from your parish councils.
Thanks, Liz. I'm just flicking through the questions. A few people identifying that there's where they've seen some sort of mistakes, and I think that's where you're saying yes. Then please do feedback to identify those and with the evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
That local knowledge is paramount. This is a desk-based exercise, if you like, that's undertaken using the parameters that have been set out by Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. But the local knowledge that feeds into it and hones the model and makes it accurate and improved is what we need.
There was a question a bit higher up. Forgive me if you've answered this, but will you be tying in the strategy with flood mitigation, for example, using wetlands and flood attenuation? Is there anything you can say about how this strategy will overlap with others? So
the obviously the kind of remit from DEFRA is that this is biodiversity, but benefits, And so we will be acknowledging within the strategy those wider benefits in terms of public health, public access, natural flood management. I think in some ways part of the reason why I'm leading on this is because it relates to the work that we're doing on nutrients and phosphates. So there is an interrelationship between all of these areas, and we have the natural flood management team within the council as well, so they are involved in feeding into this process. Charlie, you're closer to this than I, so if you want to give some information about the work that you've done to date with officers in that team, please feel free.
Yes, yeah, I am in communication with our natural flood management team. Just trying to get, so they've sent me over some of their mapping of what they're aiming to do, and also I'm trying to get in talks with them about getting some of their on a more written basis as well, to get that some of their priorities and some of their techniques embedded within the LNRS as well.
Thanks, Charlie. We've got a couple more questions here from Leominster Town Council asking if public footpaths will be targets for nature recovery.
I'm sorry.
I don't. Yeah, I think that there's not an instruction, if you like, that public pathways do need to be the focus of, but equally there is opportunity there. So we have run an engagement session internally, and we've had representation from, for example, the Natural Flood Management team, the Public Rights of Way team, because it's looking at where the opportunities are to create that connectivity. So if there is opportunity there to kind of increase public access, link to existing public rights of way, and develop those corridors, then that would seem logical. So I mean, a case in point, for example, would be that along the Lugwai corridor, there's opportunity there to address nutrients, to address natural flood management, to increase public access, and to work with some of the wider landscape recovery projects like Y-scapes as well, so that it is intrinsically linked with some of the wider work that we're involved with.
Thank you. And are you able to tell us if any of Wales is included in this mapping? I'm assuming this sort of cross-border connections there.
Yes, it's a very good question. So obviously there are devolved powers in Wales, and so there is not the same requirement to deliver LNRS as there is in England. We have liaised closely with Gloucestershire and Worcestershire, and the mapping is aligned with those counties. We are also in conversation with Shropshire, who are taking a slightly different approach, but we are ensuring that those boundaries are aligned, because we recognise that nature doesn't conform to administrative boundaries. We do a lot of work with Monmouthshire, Parish, across the border on our nutrients. So although they don't have that same requirement to deliver a nature strategy, they are doing very sort of similar work in progressing their nature recovery. So it might look slightly different across the border, but we are liaising with them.
Thanks, Liz. I've got an additional question here about, have areas designated as high priority woodland been agreed with landowners? As an example, one of these areas shown on the map for our area covers the vast majority of a current livestock farm.
So a lot of the areas that are marked within here are so currently we are in talks with landowners about this, but due to the scale of LNRS, it isn't feasible for us to be able to speak to every single landowner. As the LNRS is a voluntary option and is there to provide guidance if for these actions to take place if people want them to. If there is other things like the landowners have other priorities for that land, there is no enforcement of this. So in that example, if the landowner wanted to keep their land for the livestock, that is entirely up to them. we can provide guidance of like if you want to do nature recovery, it is well suited for particularly for woodland, but the final decision does come down to the landowner.
I've got a question here. Will landowners be able to link the mapping to applications for higher level grants? That's something you can answer.
So much of this information, I think, is still coming forward, and please feel free, Charlie or Emma, to step in if you have more detail on this. I am less cited on this because it sits outside of the council's remit, essentially. But I think the ambition is that, yes, you'd be in a higher tier if you were seeking to do nature recovery in those areas that are identified as priorities for nature recovery.
Yes, I'd say that about covers it. We are still primarily waiting on guidance from DEFRA regarding the finer details and a bit more information regarding this.
Thank you. I've got a question here. Someone talking about a common in their area, which has turned from a wildlife haven and has sort of declined in terms of the wildlife. They were asking what would be the best place to go for advice to restore this area?
Did you say common land?
Nature on a common I live on.
Yeah. So I think this is something we're picking up with property services, who oversee a lot of the common land within the county, and we are trying to delve into this ourselves to understand a little bit more about how nature recovery will work on common land. It's also when we can take away for Natural England, because at this point in time, we could give specific advice that relates to the common land based on the rights and responsibilities, etc., by taking advice from property services. But how LNRS will work is something that I am less cited on. So I think it's a question that we can take away and provide a bit more feedback. And I have in my mind that this is an area that's not yet been clarified also. Again, Charlie, Emma, if you've got more information on this, please step in.
No, I think you've captured it there, Liz. Nothing more to add.
Agreed.
Thanks. There was an additional question actually about does the council have an agreed policy in respect of the common land it owns? But it sounds to me like that's the area that we can then investigate and feedback on.
Yes, I think so. Common land is, it's the overseen by the property services team. But I think we are trying to understand if there is opportunity for us to use LNRS as a delivery mechanism to, improve the biodiversity on common land as well. So it's something we're looking into.
Right, thanks, Liz. It's a question here. Is there any funding available for projects?
So the primary funding mechanisms are the ELMS for landowners and BNG. There are landscape recovery schemes, which are kind of large scale schemes that landowners can sign up for. And there are two in the county, which is Y-Scapes and River to Ridge. And I think it's likely that there will be grants coming forward, but at this point in time, those are the two main mechanisms.
I think you've got a question here asking if roadside verges are going to be added to the map.
So they weren't listed as being one of the criteria from DEFRA that we needed to map. If the roadside verge habitats have been submitted, so the GIS information or the ecological survey information that we could map of specific habitats such as Lola Meadow, etc., then that information will have been passed on, so it will be included. I'm aware that a lot of roadside verges we won't have that information on, so that's something that if you go through the online survey and you have information on, we'd be really grateful to receive.
Right, we've got quite a few questions popping in here. Question here, where can we read the definitions of the different legend areas, like existing core habitat, etc. Is that publicly accessible at the moment? Charlie,
I don't actually think we do have a specific definition for that public at the moment, but that is a very good point of something that we should look to include. So I should make a note of that.
Thank you. And also, are you able to tell us if Verging on Wild were involved in the mapping so far, please?
I don't think we've received any survey information of mapping of habitats from Verging on Wild. They have submitted species records, I believe, in the past, but it's a group we're aware of. I'm involved with the local wildlife site designations and the panel that assesses them, and we've spoken with them about criteria for that. So we do work with them, but on this, I don't think they have submitted any information that would have been mappable.
Thanks. I've got a specific question here, which I think we might be best to pick up later, about a specific area of a rare river wide river cliff habitat. Is that something maybe we could respond to later, Charlie? Because I think it's quite a specific question.
Yes, I think we'll pick that one up later.
I'm just having a quick look through. Rosie, have you seen any more questions that you'd like we can pick up? Apologies, anyone, if I've missed one. I've got a new one coming in here. How does the process for local wildlife site designations fit with this process, please?
Local wildlife sites have been included in the baseline mapping, so they're one of the areas that are considered to be of particular importance for biodiversity. I sit on a panel with the Herefordshire Council, the Wildlife Trust and Natural England, where we go through criteria and assess sites for possibility to be added to the local wildlife site system. And as we do that, when we go through this process again in 3 to 8 years, new sites will be included in that, but they've very much been included in the mapping so far.
Brilliant. I haven't seen any other questions that necessarily are answerable today in this session, Tina, but please be reassured, folks, that if your question hasn't been addressed, then we'll look to do that in writing, either directly or along with the circulation of the slides and the recording. Again, if you've got any questions still burning, please do pop them in the chat, or if we have missed something further up that you're keen to see answered, then we can do our best to address that now if you have anything you want to put in. But otherwise, thank you so much for all your engagement. It's been absolutely fantastic to have so many of you asking questions and engaged in the session. Just having another little read, making sure that there's nothing we can address straight away.
There was one question earlier. Somebody who missed, who dropped out and had missed a section, was just asking what the data was going to be used. Just recap. The dates the survey is open, and that was Charlie was talking about was the end of February. Is that right? Ideally, early March, and what the data provided will be used for. So what? Just a quick summary of what the data that the parish and town councils provide. What's that going to be used for?
The data will be used for the refinement of the mapping. As Liz says, that local knowledge is what we need. As I believe a few people have pointed out, we have a couple holes within our mapping, so we want to try and get those holes filled and smooth, and the whole thing to be smoothed over, just so that we know that this mapping is as accessible as possible, and it'll be a resource that is easy to use and that people would want to use as well.
We've got a question here as well, just about the biodiversity records being available to developers, or whether they are remaining behind a paywall.
So I'm happy to take this one. So there's 2 elements to this, I suppose. I work for the Biological Record Centre, which is hosted by Herefordshire Council. So we operate a separate biodiversity service, which is unrelated to the LNRS. The information that you're providing as part of the online survey here is going towards the LNRS. I don't know that the council has any capacity or any mechanisms to give that information out to people. I don't know if you've got any further info on that, Liz. I'm not sure the the thought is to send that information out other than on the website, on the mapping as it will be presented to people to interrogate.
No, I think
so
its primary
it'll be via
purpose is the
that.
mapping.
Yeah. So with regard to species records that you might want to send into the Biological Record Centre, that's an entirely different matter. And we operate a service that is occasionally chargeable and sometimes free. By all means, I can put the link to our website if you wanted to have a look at that, but completely separate to the LNRS.
Great, thank you. We've had a question about the baseline data used and what has been used as a starting point to achieve the 30% return to nature by 2030. I think you might have touched on briefly about the information where that's come from and that sort of baseline setting, but if you don't mind covering that briefly again.
I'm going to turn to Emma on this. I know it aligns with the DEFRA criteria, but Emma, are you able to recall off the top of your head?
My memory is not serving me well here, but we've got nationally designated sites such as special areas of conservation, sites of special scientific interest, national nature reserves, local wildlife sites, and then we've got habitats which have been termed as irreplaceable. This, as Liz said earlier, didn't include traditional orchards, but we've subsequently included them in another layer of the mapping. But I'm sure we could probably give some detail following this meeting as to exactly what's been included. But we've included what we were restricted to.
We can also provide, sorry to interject, we can also provide a link to some of the background guidance that will be on the government website as well for those who want to kind of look into this in a bit more depth.
Great, thank you. There is also there's been a couple of comments about some inconsistencies, and I think it's worth maybe just revisiting that this is really an invitation for those inconsistencies to be highlighted, and that the survey is there to provide the opportunity for you to share that information with Herefordshire Council with us, so that those amendments can be made. I don't know if you want to say any more on that. There's just been a couple of things coming through about those areas that maybe are overlapping on farmland and core areas that are otherwise inappropriately inappropriately designated.
So essentially, this is based upon the data that we hold and that other kind of wider parties hold as well on a national level. So, if there is anomalies within that, and if or land use has changed, then having that local input to refine that mapping is essentially what the purpose of this exercise is around. So it is identifying, using your local knowledge, where is there opportunity for nature recovery, where is there not. That is in essence what we're achieving, we're seeking to achieve. So any information that you can share back with us in a format that we can easily take that and incorporate it into the mapping, bearing in mind that we're doing it across the entire county, then that would be really helpful.
Brilliant, thank you.
Sorry,
Emma,
if I can just jump in, Liz. I think the key thing about this mapping is it's not saying this is what is there. It's saying this is what we know about from the data that we've got. So this is where we're relying. One of the best ways to actually verify the data is to put it out for people to then come back to us to give us more information, more evidence would be great. As Liz said, if it's something that we can directly take the map and use, that's even better. But so this is our way of saying to you, is this right? And because we want it to be right. I also noticed some other questions where people have said, and something which might come up is the historic environment, for example. If we've identified something as a really good area for a particular habitat opportunity, and there's a really important historic monument there, obviously we will bear in mind the information that's on the ground and what is there, even if all the mapping could point to something really great being possible. But it's not always going to practically work out like that. So please don't be too alarmed that this is being taken as read.
Thank you. I think a really good clarifying end. We have reached our time now, so please continue to add your questions to the chat if you'd like to. We will be looking to address as many of those and all of those in writing as we send out the recording and the presentation slides. But we are going to draw the webinar to a close now. So thank you again to our speakers from Charlie and Liz and Emma, and for all of you for attending. It's been invaluable to have your questions and your input, and please do keep coming back to us with those responses and access the survey and the map after the fact. So brilliant, thank you all.